Hey guys, you are watching your anime world. How are you all? Please support to subscribe this channel for watching new interesting stories. So in this video, we will see what if Deku has to rescue Prince Todoroki from a dragon. Here is short summary. Prince Todoroki has been abducted by a dragon. To save him, Izuku and his friends go on an epic journey full of adventures. But before we start, if you want more stuff like this, then be sure to subscribe and like this video. And if possible, share this video with your friends. Now let's start the story. Izuku was working when he heard the news. Prince Todoroki, heir to the Flame Throne, had been abducted. Apparently the boy had been hunting with some friends and members of the royal guard when the incident occurred. Eyewitnesses described a loud roar that made the trees shake. Then a giant shadow had appeared over the woods. It blacked out the sun and confused the whole group. After the ringing in their ears faded out and they could see again, the prince had disappeared. Izuku grabbed his notebook immediately and started taking notes. This sounded like a dragon. Dragons were really rare and sightings even more rare. How big would the dragon be? If its shadow could darken a whole part of the woods, it had to be very big. But the size of a dragon didn't always determine its power. This one had to be very strong, if it managed to trick the famous royal guard and kidnap the even more famous prince. Or was it the kind of dragon that hunts in groups? There were loners and group-type dragons. If it had a group, groups of dragons were called what? A school. Geese were a flock, right? What did you call dragons? Then this whole act wouldn't have been a problem. There were dragon magicians too, and all the impressions could be an illusion, or the biggest dragon distracted the humans while the others stole the prince unnoticed. Or, Izuku stopped breathing. Shapeshifters. People who could transform into other creatures were exceptionally rare, and even when there existed one, the possible transformations included fairly normal animals, cats, dogs, mice. A shapeshifter who could transform into a dragon would be something that would definitely capture a lot of attention. Before, there only had been one dragon shapeshifter and he had disappeared years ago, so if he could. Midoriya. The boy was taken back into the real world. Your mom is looking for you. As fast as he could, he went to see his mother. She stood in the doorway of their small house and waved at her son as soon as she saw him. Izuku, she mumbled as she hugged him, you have guests. He let go of her as fast as possible and looked over her shoulder. He recognized the two people sitting on the sofa immediately. Iida, Uraraka, what are you doing here? Shouldn't you be in the capital? The two youngsters turned around at the same time, Iida with an expression as serious as ever, Uraraka with a happy smile. We're here to get you. Iida finally passed his exam and is a knight now. Look at his awesome armor. To emphasize her words, she tapped at Iida's chest piece. The armor rattled as the metal plates bumped into each other, and my master said that I was ready. And now the prince has been kidnapped. Did you see the rewards the king promises? You wouldn't believe it. So, what do you say? Will you come with us? You did train, right? Iida asked. Izuku's eyes went wide. You want to take me with you? On your adventure to save the prince? We thought of you the second we heard of the prince, Iida said. It's your chance to become a hero. Izuku's eyes teared up as he pulled both of his friends into a hug. Thanks guys, he sobbed. I'll go pack and get dressed. His mother tapped him on the shoulder. I already packed your backpack, but stay for dinner please. Yes. You two have to tell us about the capital. Asterisk. While eating, Izuku's friends told them about their lives in the capital. When they had been old enough, the both of them moved from their village to the capital to start training to be knight and to study to be a sorceress. Uraraka almost completed her apprenticeship, and her master, 13 was his name, allowed her to take the time for this adventure so she could learn to use her powers. Afterwards she'd take her exam and officially become a sorceress. Then she could open her own store and take students. Iida had just been promoted from a mere student to a member of the city guard. Now he would have to work hard to make it into the palace guard and eventually become one of the royal guards like his brother did. Thanks to some connections 13 had, he knew most of the high-ranked palace guards and royal guards in person. Iida was commanded to be the guardian and companion of Uraraka. 13 even knows All Might. He stopped by personally to wish me good luck for the journey. All Might. Izuku was almost not embarrassed about the high-pitched squeal his voice became. because of how excited he became when he heard the name of his role model. You mean greatest hero of our country, All Might. Saved 1,000 people when a pack of chimeras attacked the city, All Might. The All Might, right, that one, Uraraka said, we told him about you. He laughed and said, an interesting friend you have there, Uraraka my girl, Iida my boy. Uraraka's acting could use some improvement, but Izuku almost fainted. All Might said that, about him, the man he admired since he was a small child, the greatest hero of their country. He also said that he'd like to meet you when we come back, Iida said. Izuku got up so fast his chair fell to the ground with a dull thumping sound. What are we waiting for? Let's go already. Izuku's mother smiled mildly when she saw her son burning with passion. She knew how much this adventure, heroism and All Might meant to him. That didn't stop her from worrying about her son. Be careful, his mother said when he hugged her goodbye, and try to write to me, okay? I have to hear of you. Of course, and I have Iida and Uraraka with me, nothing is going to happen to us. Actually he wasn't too sure about that. Dragons were extremely dangerous and who knew what other things would await them on their journey. But it wouldn't hurt to ease his mother's worries a bit. Are you coming now? We want to take off. Just now you couldn't get ready fast enough, Uraraka called from outside. Goodbye, Izuku said, and with this he was gone, went out of the door and all she could see was his back. Goodbye, Midoriya Inko whispered, as proud tears mixed with tears of fear. Chapter text. Izuku had hoped that their journey would be uneventful, but he must have underestimated his bad luck. Their plan had been to go into taverns to ask if anyone had seen any traces of dragons. But just when they had taken off, Uraraka spotted a river that they couldn't find on any map, and neither did any of the three remember it from the past, when they played in the woods a lot. Izuku had been sure that the clear water that peacefully purled next to them was an illusion, but Uraraka kneeled down on the bank and reached for the shimmering water. Gurgling, the water parted around her hand. Real water, she reported. You should stay away from the river, Iida said. I have a bad feeling about this. It could be a trap. Izuku nodded in agreement. Didn't he hear about something like this before? Structures that appeared suddenly, perfectly round circles on the ground, stone rings, trees that grew faster than was normal, mossy stones, rivers that suddenly changed the direction of their currents. He couldn't remember. All his thoughts were sticky, as if his brain had been filled up with honey, and the goo made his consciousness work slower. Somehow his arms also felt heavy and he couldn't keep his eyes open properly. He heard a sound, as if someone fell to the ground. Were his friends calling his name? Oh, it must be him who fell then. Ah, yes, there was mud on his face. He turned his head far enough to be able to see the concerned faces of the sorceress and the knight out of his half-opened eyes. Behind them there was a small creature in the air, fluttering, jittering. Like a flash it hit him. The river they didn't know, the clear water that Uraraka touched, his sudden tiredness, the feeling as if he was stuck in a big jar of syrup, everything made sense. Fairies, he pressed with the last of his strength, slow them, then catch him. Or sugar water, calm them or blackmail. Then he couldn't move anymore. The paralyzing poison in his veins didn't hurt, but he wouldn't be able to move for a few hours, enough to take him prisoner and feed him one of the berries. That would be fatal. Fairies kept humans like pets. They didn't actually mean harm, but it wasn't really pleasant to depend on fairies for the rest of your life. Fairies wanted to keep everything they liked, and for some reason humans were one of the most interesting things in the eyes of fairies. The problem with the berries was that they transformed the whole system of a human and made the victim unable to live off human food. Had he eaten one of the berries, he could eat and would still starve miserably. This way the fairies made sure that humans couldn't run away from them. And they ran into the trap head-on. Like a spider, the fairies had crafted a web around them, had used their surroundings to their advantage. The river had been the last string. Uraraka's touch had triggered the trap, and now they were trapped. Izuku couldn't move, and he wasn't even sure if his friends had heard his last mumbled words. Through his half-lidded eyes he observed how Uraraka used a spell. Her wand began to glow in a faint blue light and some kind of fog began to spread. The fairies that were caught up inside of the fog got frozen in midair. The small wings fluttered desperately, blurred out to look like colorful smears, as they frantically tried to free themselves from the iron grip the magic was. Iida reacted fast and began to collect the small creatures out of the air. Soon he held a cloth, ornated with runes and filled with fairies, and turned around to the other fairies. "Give the antidote to our friend and let us go, then we'll set your friends free. Otherwise," he didn't say the threat out loud, but the determination on his face and the long sword on his hip spoke more than 1,000 words. He had spoken loudly, so that every fairy in the woods would hear him. That was very smart of him. Fairy groups always consisted out of many families, and blood relatives meant a lot to fairies. When someone noticed that their relative was in danger, they would have to follow their instructions. The woods grew still, complete silence. It sent shivers down Izuku's spine. It was as if every bird, every tree, every single creature in the area held their breath, even the river didn't make a sound. Then a chirr arose in the woods. It sounded like 100, no 1,000 crickets suddenly decided to sing their song. The angry fairies shrieked with their tiny voices, expressed their fury, and eventually, finally, they seemed to have decided on what to do. Izuku felt a faint sting and saw an especially tiny fairy flying away from his hand. It held something in its hand that looked like a syringe. It probably gave the antidote to him. He could already feel how the strength returned to his arms and legs. As fast as he could, he stood up and walked over to his friends. He tapped Iida on the shoulder. "To get out of a fairy territory, we have to go through 2 trees that form a gate. We won't find it on our own, so please tell them to show us the way." Quickly Iida told the fairies what he wanted, and some fairies flew in front of them to show them the way, their wings leaving a kind of dust in the air that glittered in the sun. Hadn't Izuku been dead tired from being poisoned and laying in the mud of a river bank, he would have started to take notes about fairies and their behavior already, but that could wait until later. Right now their goal was to get out of here. Uraraka looked at him from the side and grinned. "Your clothes," she whispered, "they're a little dirty. Let me help you." Izuku suddenly was embraced by pink smoke, and he heard the faint tingling of bells. The scent of vanilla filled his nostrils, and his shivering, tired muscles recovered a little of their strength. When he looked down on himself, he noticed that his clothes were completely clean, as if he'd just put them on. "Uraraka," he whispered, alarmed. Magic required a lot of energy, and they would be on their journey for a long time now. She shouldn't waste her strength like this. "No worries," she whispered back. "It's a really simple spell. It doesn't use more energy than getting up to get a glass of water. I'm still as fit as a fiddle." To emphasize her statement, she pounded her chest. He took a relieved breath. Under no circumstances he wanted to be responsible for her overwork herself. After half an hour they found the gate from trees. A knobby old oak, its trunk grew twisted, had its branches entangled with the branches of a straight and rather young beech tree. The both of them formed a perfect gate that the friends could trespass to leave. As soon as they had passed through the gate, Iida threw the cloth that he had wrapped around the fairies back through the gate. The friends immediately began to run. A few hundred meters from the dangerous part of the woods, the 3 of them fell down on a patch of grass on a clearing. Izuku stared into the sky. The clouds above formed a fluffy, white dragon that soared above them. He took a deep breath, took in the scent of the woods. For the first time since they had entered the fairies' territory, his muscles relaxed. For a moment he allowed himself to take a break. They had survived the first danger of their adventure. Fairies weren't very impressive per se, but there had been more people who lost their lives to fairies than to dragons, what may have been the case because fairies were exceedingly more common to find than dragons, but still. They had survived the attack of a magical species. That was an achievement you could be proud of, right? Still, "We survived the cruel attack of a group of fairies," didn't really sound interesting or admirable. Izuku sighed. "Shall we continue?" Iida asked after some time and stood up. "There is still some time until the sun sets. Maybe we can make it to the next village. There we could find a tavern to stay the night." Uraraka and Izuku also got up, and hence the friends continued their journey. They didn't find a tavern that night, but instead they found a friendly family of satyrs who helped them make a camp in their territory. They also promised that they wouldn't hurt them, and the 3 of them trusted them. Satyrs were honest most times and just wanted to have fun, so it wasn't unusual for satyrs to let strangers stay the night. On a bed from plaited grass Izuku fell asleep. His dreams were full of glittering dust and cloudy dragons. The three of them spent the next few weeks searching for information. They asked around in every village, went to every tavern to get every last bit of available information. Did anybody see a dragon? Any charred landscapes, killed cattle? Any missing treasure? Even though Izuku claimed that dragons weren't that greedy for gold itself, as most stories made it seem, they just liked shiny things. That's why dragons often lived near water, they liked how the sunrays would reflect on the surface. Any kidnapped princesses? No, the dragon kidnapped a prince already. Their search remained fruitless. Nobody had a direct hint. If there was a hint, it was a story a friend of a friend had heard several years ago. Izuku let himself fall down on the floor next to their campfire. He was frustrated. The campfire was a magic fire Uraraka created. It only burned hot enough to give out a pleasant warmth. A few minutes ago they had cooked on the fire and the bluish-violet flames had burned with greater heat. "Don't worry," Uraraka said. She sat on the other side of the fire, her legs folded. She was reading her magic book. "We'll find a trace. Eventually." "I agree," Iida informed them out of the tent he was currently setting up. "I'm sure somebody has seen something, we just have to find that person." "Of course we will," Izuku mumbled, "but when? Don't lose your patience, Midoriya. Only those who have patience can earn something." "Where did you learn a quote like that, Iida?" Uraraka laughed. "It sounds like some kind of a country lore." Iida cleared his throat, and even though they couldn't see him, because he was inside of the tent, they knew that he was adjusting his glasses in that moment. "Some older students are from farmer families. I must have picked it up from them." "Admit it, you read a book full of motivational quotes or something." Uraraka was laughing uncontrollably now. The frisky sound bounced off of the trees around them and echoed through the woods. Iida crawled out of the now finished tent and straightened up to his full size in front of the fire. "And what?" His whole body bristled with earnestness. "If I did do that?" On this evening the friends laughed a lot. Exhausted they slept afterwards, they even forgot to keep watch. In the middle of the night a shadow creeped around the fire. In almost no time there were two shadows, or was it more? The twitching of the magical flames made it hard to tell. A dark aura clouded the camp. What would the morning bring? Chapter text. Izuku woke up. Still half asleep he looked around the tent. Next to him he could hear the even breaths of Uraraka and Iida's faint snoring. A small smile appeared on his face. He sat up, careful not to wake his friends up. Careful he climbed over Iida, who was lying in front of the exit, and went outside. The fresh scent of a new day greeted him. The morning dew reflected the light of the rising sun. Izuku began to stretch to loosen his muscles up. Even though they could sleep without getting wet and create the illusion of a safe shelter thanks to the tent, it was still as if they slept on the ground, not very comfortable. He tried to rub his sore neck, when suddenly a voice scared him to death. "Can I help you with that? I'm really good at giving massages." Izuku almost jumped off the ground and looked around in panic. What? Who? Where? How? Frantically his eyes darted around the camp. The magical campfire was almost burnt down. The flames that flickered in a light green color now were not even high enough to reach Izuku's ankles. The tent, the peaceful clearing, there. Footprints in the soft ground near the forest edge. 2. No 3 pairs of feet that were not their own for sure. Izuku cleared his throat. "Is somebody there?" From the woods he heard whispering. "Great, now he found us, Hagakure," a male voice said. He sounded annoyed at the other person, Hagakure. "Didn't we want to talk to them anyway?" Another male voice answered conciliating. "Sooner or later we would have had revealed ourselves. Hagakure didn't do anything wrong, except for scaring him half to death maybe." "Thanks Ojiro." Another voice, this time a female one, said. "Tokiyami is just angry that his magic wasn't strong enough to put the fire out." "Why did you want to put it out in the first place?" the second one, Ojiro, asked. The first one, Tokiyami, grumbled something under his breath. Then he cleared his throat and there was a rustling in some bushes. Izuku took a step in the direction of the noise. The three of them didn't seem dangerous to him. "We can go talk to him then," Tokiyami said. In this exact moment somebody stood up. Behind the bushes there stood a person unlike anyone Izuku had seen ever before. He was a little smaller than Izuku, but even though his body looked like one of a regular human being, his head was that of a raven. Izuku's eyes were popping out of his head. Was he a shapeshifter? Cursed. A new species. "Greetings," the raven man said. "My name is Tokiyami Fumikage in my group and I need your help." Asterisk. As it turned out Hagakure, that was the name of the group's female member, was able to scare Izuku like this because she had been sitting at the campfire, invisible. Her two companions had been hidden in the woods, so the friends wouldn't see them as soon as they woke up. That was no problem for the invisible girl, of course, that's why she sat there. She only had wanted to be helpful when she offered Izuku help with his neck. Iida, who woke up exactly 1 hour after the sun rose, woke Uraraka and now the six of them sat around the newly sparked campfire. Izuku couldn't stop to wonder what kind of strange group the other three were. Tokiyami's head was literally a raven, Hagakure was invisible and Ojiro had a tail. Had their party been cursed? A very powerful and very angry, which must have cursed them, if it was a curse. "You said you needed our help?" Izuku asked, when all of them had something of the breakfast Iida prepared in front of them. Or rather, all of them except Hagakure, because she hadn't talked for some minutes and he didn't know her exact position, but he guessed it was in front of her. Ojiro nodded. "The rest of our group are in immediate danger. We barely managed to get away and promised them to return as quickly as possible to help." "Is it a curse?" Izuku blurted out. Tokiyami looked at him, darkness in his eyes. "Worse, more horrible than a curse?" Uraraka asked shocked. "What could be more horrible than a curse?" Ojiro looked to the ground. Whatever Hagakure did, the camp's atmosphere changed to a depressed, gloomy one. "There are many things more wicked than curses, sorceress," Tokiyami said, "but the evil we're facing is one of the most fearsome ones that exist in this world." They all held their breaths. Unicorns. Asterisk. Unicorns were one of the most dangerous species that existed. These magical creatures lived in groups and were peaceful, as long as there was no young woman involved. As soon as this was the case, the equine creatures went mad. They were in no way herbivores, like horses. They lived off the innocent spirit of the young girls and women they seduced with their beautiful appearance and took to their territories after that. A group of unicorns could live off a single girl for some months up to half a year. The younger the girl, the longer it lasted. Whenever a group of unicorns came through an area, people hid their daughters, men their girlfriend or wife. They would only relax when the unicorns were gone again. Izuku held his breath. "Unicorns?" Iida asked alarmed. "What happened to you?" Ojiro and Tokiyami looked to the ground. "The 4 girls of our group were kidnapped by the unicorns. Hagakure could escape, because she's, well, invisible. The other 3 are still with the unicorns and if we don't hurry they'll be dead soon. The 3 of them are anything but weak, but you know that unicorns bane their victims so they have enough time to devour them," Tokiyami said. "The 3 of them are probably paralyzed and are being eaten alive right now, these devious unicorns. You're the only people in the area and alone we can't do anything. You have to help us." Hagakure sounded desperate, even though she was eating at the moment. Izuku knew because there was a floating piece of bread left to Ojiro's shoulder. Uraraka nodded. "Of course we'll help. Right, Iida, Midoriya." When Izuku looked up he saw the same aspiration he felt rushing through his veins in her eyes, the aspiration to save, to protect. "When do we take off?" Asterisk. The 6 of them broke camp and Tokiyami used a spell that would erase any traces of them. He explained that unicorns, similar to humans, relied on their sense of sight, not like other creatures on hearing or smelling. Izuku noted it down in his notebook quickly, and then another question popped up in his head. "Tokiyami, what kind of magic do you use? I've never seen anything like this before. You're not a sorcerer, right?" The birdhead shook his head. "I was the apprentice of a witch. But I wasn't able to complete my apprenticeship, because the poor woman was made responsible for dying cattle and humans in our village. The people burned my master and I had to flee." Uraraka, who had flinched by the word, witch, quickly caught up to Tokiyami with some steps. One of her hands settled on his shoulder and squeezed it soothingly. "I'm so sorry," the sorceress said, and it seemed that she meant it. Even though sorcerer and witches had a century-old conflict, I haven't completed my apprenticeship either, and I can't imagine what it would be like if my master died. Are you searching for a new master? Tokiyami gave a small nod. He looked gloomy, his shoulders down, what made him look smaller. Our group helps him find a master who will let him complete his apprenticeship. After that he'll continue traveling with us, right? Ojiro bumped Tokiyami's shoulder with his and woke him from his slump. The boy nodded. Right. He cleared his throat. I'm going to call Dark Shadow so he can show us the way. Dark Shadow is his familiar, Hagakure whispered. Please don't be afraid when he summons him. It can be a little scary the first time you see it. With wide eyes Izuku observed how Tokiyami held out his arm and whispered some words, not loud enough that Izuku could understand him clearly. Out of thin air there appeared a black shadow, right above his arm. Soon it grew bigger, twisted and stretched until it formed a huge, black bird. The giant raven opened its wings, stretched them, and tried if everything was working. It then began to groom its feathers with its big, black beak. Tokiyami looked at the raven with an almost fond expression on his face and began to scratch its head with his free hand. Just now Izuku realized that both of Tokiyami's forearms were wrapped with thick, black leather, almost like one of the gloves falconers wore. The shoulder parts of his robe were equipped with the same leather. It was probably needed, Izuku thought, as he looked at the deadly claws Dark Shadow sported. Then the young witcher leaned forward and whispered something to the monstrous raven. The bird nodded and rose into the air. With a few powerful strokes of his wings he disappeared over the tree tops. Follow me, Tokiyami said. Dark Shadow will guide us. A look to the side showed Izuku that his companions were just as stunned by the summoning of the familiar. How did you do this? Uraraka asked excited. Tokiyami turned his back on her and began to walk ahead. As if I'd tell a sorceress, he said. Oh come on, Uraraka said, I won't tell anybody. You would tell everybody. Izuku and Iida looked at each other and smiled about Uraraka's curiousness. Then they also began to follow Tokiyami. About an hour later they had arrived near the group of unicorns. On the way they had used Izuku's and Tokiyami's combined knowledge about unicorns and the information Dark Shadow provided to create a plan. Alright, so Uraraka is going to be at a safe spot and will create illusions that act as a decoy, to lure the unicorns to the northeast of the clearing. There is a small stream there. Ojiro will accompany her. If you're discovered you'll need at least 2 people to defend yourselves. Dark Shadow saw 9 unicorns on the clearing, and 2 in the cave in which the others are. That adds up to 11 unicorns. These 2 are probably guardians or are eating right now, so they probably won't move. If you need help, use the whistle I gave to you. Dark Shadow will come to your aid immediately and we'll hear you and come as well. While you distract the other 9 unicorns, we're going to sneak into the cave. It's basically a hole beneath a hill, maybe an abandoned den of pixies, but the girls are definitely in there. While Iida and Midoriya knock the unicorns out, Hagakure and I will free the girls. I can lift the Bane, but it takes me some time. I need 7 minutes at best, 10 minutes if it's not going well. As soon as Dark Shadow gives the signal, you flee from all fights and come back here as soon as possible. Tokiyami summarized their plan once more. Questions? Izuku looked at those around him. Determined faces met his gaze. He gripped the sword at his side, felt the blank metal of the hilt. He would use it for the first time now. The first time he would wield his blade against another living being. The realization that he possibly would have to take a life hit him hard, even though it would be a life that was endangering other people's lives. But right now was no time to think about this. Quickly he got rid of the thoughts. His head cleared up and he focused solely on the fight. Uraraka and Ojiro crawled away through the undergrowth, and after some minutes of breathless silence they could hear excited neighing from the clearing. Unicorns even sounded like horses, Izuku noticed. Tokiyami gave them the signal to follow him and they crawled to the southwestern side of the clearing, where the girls were hidden. Tokiyami cloaked the entrance with a shadow and under the cover of darkness they sneaked into the cave. Inside it wasn't much brighter than inside of the shadow. When his eyes finally adjusted to the darkness, he could see the two unicorns Dark Shadow had told them of. They almost looked like horses from behind. One of them had reddish fur. The other one had gray spots. What was different from normal horses was their extreme height. Both of them stood over a meter higher than Izuku at the shoulder. He could see the muscles working under the fur of the unicorns when he carefully slipped nearer. Somehow they had to reach the heads of the animal, otherwise they couldn't chop the horns off. If that happened to a unicorn, it lost consciousness for a few hours. This gave the hunter the opportunity to slit its throat or remove the horn completely. A unicorn without a horn could live, but it couldn't eat anymore and just starved after some months. Tokiyami compared it to cockroaches that could live without their heads but starved because they couldn't eat anymore. As long as there was a little bit of the horn left, the unicorn could completely regenerate the horn over the course of some days. A unicorn's horn was very valuable, because it was very difficult to get your hands on one and because it contained huge magical powers. Most sorcerers and witches relied on the twisted horn's power to use it in healing potions, love potions and different magical poisons. But now they should concentrate on how to chop the horn off in the most efficient and quick way. With some hand signs he explained his plan to Iida. Good that the both of them knew each other this well. They had been a team since their childhood. Iida nodded. He understood. Izuku took a deep breath, and then they dashed forward. The ground in the cave was slanting and hence they jumped from the highest point possible. The both of them landed on the unicorns' backs. The giant creature reared up and Izuku would have fallen down if it weren't for his legs that were slung around the unicorn's neck. It threw its head back, confused what kind of pesky creature suddenly clung to its back and disturbed it. Izuku could feel the blind rage of the unicorn, as it fought under him, and to be safe he clutched its wild, gray mane with his hand. He drew his sword with his free hand and cut the horn off with one single blow. The creature went still under him and as fast as he could he jumped off, just in time. The massive body of the unicorn collapsed under him and fell to the ground heavily. Out of breath Izuku stared at the unconscious monster in front of him. Through the adrenaline he almost didn't notice how Iida's unicorn followed his to the ground. Both of them are out cold, Iida reported to the deeper part of the cave, which Izuku hadn't paid mind before. Good, Hagakure called back. He's lifting the bane right now, guard the entrance. All right. Iida turned around to look at him. Let us go, Midoriya. At the entrance they could see the whole clearing. About 100 meters away from them there were 9 unicorns that ran around frantically, confused by the many Urarakas that walked around between them. She's really good at this, Izuku said. She's going to become a great sorceress. Iida nodded in agreement, but then he said something that alerted Izuku. I'm a little confused. Shouldn't there be 11 unicorns in total? Yes. Izuku was confused. There were 9 over there and 2 in the cave. Equals 11. I can see 8 unicorns from here. In this moment the whistle sounded, the illusions disappeared and the scream of a unicorn mixed with one of a raven. As fast as they could, Iida and Izuku ran towards the hideout where Ojiro and Uraraka were supposed to be. When they arrived they met Uraraka, who stood protectively in front of the unconscious Ojiro and held up a shield from pure magic, and Dark Shadow, who was pecking at the eyes of the unicorn directly in front of the barrier. When the sorceress saw the 2 boys that entered the protected space she looked relieved. As strong as Dark Shadow was, he could only attack 1 unicorn at a time. One of them was blind already, he was just attacking a second one. Uraraka, Iida suddenly called. Before Izuku could think of the best strategy, to take on the remaining 7 unicorns, do what we practiced. She quickly nodded and muttered a word that Izuku couldn't understand over the angry neighing of the unicorns, but suddenly his feet weren't attached to the ground anymore and he could move freely, in the air. Her special technique, Iida informed him, while he jumped out of the protected area and walked above the heads of the unicorns. With 2 perfectly executed cuts 2 of the unicorns were down on the ground and the blind unicorn stomped over them in its rage. Izuku felt dizzy as he saw the bloodied hoof prints, but he collected himself and followed Iida's example. Soon 2 more horns were lying on the ground and Izuku desperately tried to keep his balance in the air. How long do we have to endure this? Uraraka asked with a concerned look in Ojiro's direction. The boy still didn't move. Another concerned look was directed at her shield. The violet barrier flickered and almost faltered. 3 spells at the same time was too much for her. Izuku took a look at the faltering barrier and bit his lip. They had to hurry and knock all the unicorns out, it was the only way. Dark Shadow attacked a 3rd unicorn, picked at its eye sockets. Izuku saw the blood dripping off his beak. Quickly he walked through the air towards the 2 blind unicorns, and with 2 chops they were missing their horns and fell to the ground. Better safe than sorry. Panicking he looked around, saw the magic shield wavering like dying flames, saw Iida in the air. Where was Dark Shadow? He couldn't spot him anywhere, but just now Iida knocked the 3rd blind monster and the 2nd last unicorn out. Only one was left, but Izuku was too far away, and the more he moved, the more energy it drained from Uraraka. What should he do? What could he do? Uraraka looked like she would throw up or faint or both any minute. Izuku took a deep breath and screamed, "Let go." The flickering barrier died out. Izuku fell to the forest floor and got up, fast enough to see the last unicorn launch itself at Uraraka. The eyes of the creature were filled with the bloodlust of a cornered beast. It would impale Uraraka. Izuku saw it before his eyes, her small body pinned to the tree behind her, all the blood. She was their only healer, she was going to die. A silver flash, the screeching of breaking metal. A sword danced through the air, then 2 bodies hit the ground. Uraraka took a step forward to catch him. The glasses crooked, the eyes behind it closed. A thin line of blood ran from his lips down his chin. One hand clutched the sword he used to cut off the horn that broke through his chest piece, the horn impaling his stomach. The other hand tried to grab Uraraka's arm, searching for support. Iida. Izuku didn't know whose scream it was it his, Uraraka's? The hand hit the bloody ground. Chapter text. Izuku was at Iida's side as fast as he could. The young man lost consciousness and his breathing was shallow. The horn was still stuck in the wound. "Get it out," Uraraka commanded. "Get it out and get him out of his chest piece, I'll heal him immediately." Izuku nodded. She was exhausted, but to heal Iida was more important than resting. He grabbed the horn with both of his hands and pulled it out of the body beneath him in one try. The twisted horn was painted red. Izuku felt a shiver run down his spine. Iida's armor may have held the horn off a little, but it still left a deep wound. Then he grabbed the destroyed chest piece. The metal was broken, but Izuku still managed to get rid of it. The shirt that Iida was wearing underneath was soaked with blood. Since he had pulled the horn out, the blood had been seeping out of the wound. Izuku tasted metal on his tongue. Uraraka ripped the shirt off to get access to the wound. She began to cast a spell in the same moment. A bright blue light began to glow and she grew still. The light blue slowly began to grow darker, looked dirty from the darker tone that spread through the light. Uraraka bit down on her upper lip in concentration. Izuku felt useless. There was nothing he could do for his friends right now. He looked at Ojiro, who was still lying in front of the tree in unconsciousness. Izuku kneeled down next to the blonde and took a look at his head. The blood from his head wound had made his hair sticky, but it wasn't bleeding anymore and it was almost closed as well. Uraraka must have done that while she was holding up the shield. Izuku didn't know a lot about healing magic, but he knew that the sorcerer should touch the patient and it was very difficult to knit the cells together otherwise. Again he was surprised by Uraraka's great power. He went back to Uraraka. The girl was caught up in the healing, she had even closed her eyes. She was mumbling something and Izuku wasn't sure if it was magic words or random nothings that should make Iida wake up. Whatever it was, he hoped it would work. Iida's shirt was ruined already, so he took some of the fabric and used it as a makeshift bandage for Ojiro. Better safe than sorry, even if the boy didn't bleed anymore. Approaching steps made Izuku look up. A girl he had never seen before came running towards them. Her steps were wobbly, as if she just woke up. Her violet hair was cut short and she wore light gray cloak. The girl stopped running and reached behind her to reveal a lute. "I'm soothing the pain," she said, and as soon as she said it the air was filled with her music. Izuku felt better immediately. It was as if all the exhaustion was gone and he just got up in the morning. Uraraka opened her eyes and the healing magic glowed stronger again. The music revived their spirits and refreshed them. More steps drew near. Izuku saw Tokiyami come from the woods, the two horns from the cave in his arms, dark shadow on his shoulder. Two girls followed right behind him. One wore a green dress and her hair that was just as green was tied up in a bow behind her back. Next to her there was another girl. She had horns on her head and her curly hair was the same pink color as her skin. Her eyes were big and dark with light irises. The three girls had to be the three missing members of Tokiyami's party, Izuku concluded. We have to get away from here, Tokiyami said. Even though we have some time until the unicorns wake up, it wouldn't be a wise decision to simply stay here. Izuku nodded, but pointed to Iida and Ojiro. We have two unconscious injured. Uraraka is healing Iida at the moment, so we only have 5 people to carry them. If you, he pointed to the girl with the lute, proceed to make music. I'm carrying Ojiro, the pink-haired girl said suddenly. The rest can take the one with glasses. With some quick steps she was at Ojiro's side and carefully picked him up. Tsuyu, can you help me put him on my back? I don't want him to fall. The green-haired girl, Tsuyu was her name, helped the other one to secure Ojiro. Then she took a step back to examine her work. He'll complain when he wakes up, you know, she croaked, his tail's on the ground. We have different things to worry about than Ojiro's tail right now, the pink-haired girl said and began walking into the direction they left their luggage at. The rest began to lift Iida up, just high enough so they could carry him while Uraraka continued to heal him. The girl with the lute was still playing, a song that was probably easing Iida's and Ojiro's pain and refreshing all the others. Izuku had heard of music magic, but he had never had the chance to meet one of the bards, so everything he knew about it was what he got from travelers telling him. According to them, bard magicians were not that different from sorcerers and witches. The magic they used was the same as the one qualifying one to become a witch or a sorcerer. But different from those, the bards activated the magic with music, not with spells, potions or summonings. Most times the music had a stimulating effect on those listening, but it could also put people to sleep or ease pain. The song the girl was playing was apparently one that refreshed and eased pain. Izuku remembered that there was a famous bard living in the capital. He had weekly performances and was very popular among the people in the capital. He should ask Iida and Uraraka if they had seen him perform when they lived in the capital. As fast as possible they brought Iida to their makeshift camp. Tokiyami began to brew a potion over a fire he put on quickly. He didn't tell them what it was for. Ashido, the name of the pink-haired girl, and Tsuyu began to set up the tent, so Iida and Ojiro were somewhat protected. Uraraka was still kneeling at Iida's side, still healing. She had dark bags under her eyes and her breathing was uneven, strained. Even Jiro's music, she was sitting next to Tokiyami and playing her lute, couldn't do anything for her. Izuku went back to the place they fought at again to collect the horns. Uraraka and Tokiyami could share them and take them with them, or they could sell them. They had to have a purpose. He cleaned the bloody horn in the stream. As soon as the wound was healed, Iida would wake up and it would be as if nothing ever happened. They didn't need a bloody trophy to remind them of the time they almost lost their friend. When he came back to the camp, Tokiyami gave him a bowl filled with a brown liquid. He pointed to the tent. Inside, Uraraka was still healing. Izuku nodded. The camp was silent. Nobody dared to speak and possibly disturb the sorceress's concentration. Only Jiro's lute still sounded, her fingers skillfully dancing along the strings, producing sounds, magic. He went inside the tent. Uraraka was sitting on the ground next to Iida, the blue glow stronger than before. But when he looked at her carefully he could see her hanging shoulders and her quivering fingers. He kneeled down next to her and put the bowl to her lips. "Drink," he said, and she opened her mouth a little. He supported her head with his free hand and made her drink the potion. She looked better immediately. Magic was an amazing thing. The blue glow grew stronger. "It's a little difficult," Uraraka whispered. "To recreate organs is difficult and the horn is like a magic weapon that's making it even more difficult. But I stopped all the bleeding and I'm putting everything together right now. Give some of the stuff to him too, it's not only exhausting for me." Izuku nodded. Quickly he went outside again and asked Tokiyami for a refill. He gave the potion to his friend and some of the paleness disappeared from his cheeks. "I need 4 hours, if everything works," Uraraka said, longer if something goes wrong. He nodded again. Of course healing took its time. Without magic it would take a lot more time, they should be grateful. You don't have to be silent, by the way, she said, before he could exit the tent. Outside it took them some time to start talking. Jiro's music filled the air around the campfire with its magic. Tokiyami was mumbling over his potion, improved it or whatever. Tsuyu looked at Izuku with her big eyes, when he sat down next to her. Your name is Midoriya, right? When he nodded she continued, thanks for your help. Without you, we'd still be unicorn fodder. No problem, he assured her, we're glad we could help. We couldn't make any progress on our journey anyway, and if someone need help it's important of course. His cheeks blushed in a dark red, when he realized that he had begun to ramble again. What's your journey's goal then? Ashido asked suddenly. Izuku turned around to her. We're searching for Prince Todoroki. As it seems he was abducted by a dragon and we want to rescue him. But until now we haven't found a dragon or any trace. We heard of the burned forest. It's supposed to be completely charred, only the skeletons of the trees left, not a single green leaf left, Jiro said but didn't stop playing her lute. For real? Izuku's face lit up. That was the first hint they got that was actually helpful. Where? How do we get there? You need to ask around there, we only heard about it. But the locals seem to be really afraid of the forest. It's only natural to be afraid if there's a dragon involved, Tokiyami said, still occupied with his potion. What is that, Tokiyami? Izuku asked. The brown liquid inside the kettle had turned into a gooey, violet one. It's a potion that speeds up healing processes. It should heal Ojiro completely and help Uraraka heal Iida. If everything turns out alright, he'll wake up in about 2 hours. After he does we can take you to the next city. There you can sleep in a real bed for a night. You need that, especially the sorceress. A few minutes later the Witcher disappeared into the tent. He came back with 2 empty bowls and followed by Ojiro. His blonde hair was disheveled and he looked to the sky puzzled. The sun seemed to be too bright for him. Izuku made space for him next to the fire. He smiled at him thankfully and sat down next to him. I couldn't fulfill my duty. He looked into the dancing flames with a sad expression. Izuku wanted to tell him that it wasn't that bad, but Iida almost died. It was pretty bad, even though it surely hadn't been Ojiro's fault alone. They should have prepared for the unicorns not falling for the illusions or at least have picked a second guard for Uraraka. It's in the past now, Tokiyami said. Before Izuku could find words, we have to concentrate on what lies ahead. Iida will survive and everyone can continue their journey. Izuku nodded confirmatively. There's no use worrying about things we can't change anymore. Ojiro looked a little better and smiled grateful. Ojiro, look, what exactly am I supposed to look at, Hagakure? I'm pulling funny faces to make you feel better. The boy smiled, even though he obviously couldn't see the grimaces. Thanks, Hagakure. Asterisk. 2.5 hours later Jiro's music was interrupted by a scream from the tent. Iida. Uraraka sounded excited, angry, tired, relieved, everything at once. A groan full of pain was the answer. Izuku rushed into the tent. Iida had propped himself up on his elbows and looked around confused. He was still wearing the ripped, bloody shirt and parts of his armor, but the wound on his stomach was only a fresh scar now. Why did you do that? Uraraka asked him. Izuku noticed her holding his hand. Iida's eyes answered everything. Izuku left them alone for the moment. He's all right, he told the waiting ones outside. Thank you for helping with the healing so much. It was our fault that he was injured in the first place, we had to help, Tsuyu said. Izuku thanked her with a smile. You talked about a city, Tokiyami. How far is it from here? There are only a few hours left until the sun sets. Can we still make it in time? The other shook his head. We won't reach it today, but we will tomorrow if we leave as soon as it's dark. Then dark shadow can carry your night. He becomes stronger in the dark. So we wait until the sun sets and then we go. Izuku looked into the faces of those around him. His new friends nodded in agreement. Jiro started to play again and this way they waited until the lights grew fainter. Asterisk. Sundown came quick. Dark shadow grew and grew and grew. It was as if watching an agriculture magician grow their plants. As soon as the sun disappeared behind the horizon, dark shadow had grown to the size of a small pony. They strapped Iida, who had fallen asleep, exhausted from the healing, to Dark Shadow's back and began to walk. Uraraka and Tokiyami went ahead, Dark Shadow and Iida between them, the others followed behind them. Everyone was tired because it was very late. Jiro had stopped playing. Izuku couldn't blame her. Music magic was just as exhausting as any other type of magic, and she had played for many hours without a break, to help ease Ojiro and Iida's pain and give everyone else energy. Once she stumbled and almost fell. Ashido asked her if she wanted to be carried after that. Laughing, Jiro assured her that it wasn't necessary, but Izuku saw her turning around to hide her yawn. Who made the group stop in the end was Hagakure. She said that she couldn't go on anymore. Izuku suspected that she was talking about Ojiro, who looked extremely pale. He had been silent for an hour now, but he still gritted his teeth and went on. Even though his life hadn't been in danger, his wound was still on his head. "You should go see a doctor in the city," Izuku said, concerned. Tsuyu nodded, concern visible in her eyes as well. They set up the tent for Ojiro and Iida. The rest slept outside, wrapped in blankets near to the fire to protect them from the cold of the night. They got up early the next morning and went on, always careful not to overexert Iida and Ojiro too much. Many breaks later they finally arrived in the city. It was a big city, compared to the village Izuku was from at least. "This is goodbye then," Tokiyami said and held out his hand for Izuku to take. Izuku shook his hand. "We're just going to let Ojiro see a doctor and then continue our journey to the south." "You're going north, right?" Tokiyami said. Izuku nodded. "If we see witches we'll tell them of you. Maybe they can contact you then." "Thank you. Goodbye, Midoriya." Ojiro and Jiro gave him a respectful nod. Tsuyu shook his hand. Ashido hugged him and Hagakure pulled him into an invisible hug as well. The friends watched as the 6 others turned their backs and disappeared behind a corner. "All right," Uraraka said, "let's look for a tavern." They rented the room for the night. Iida said it would be enough for him to recover. They ate the meal the hostess cooked for them. It wasn't the best food Izuku had ever eaten, but it filled his stomach. Uraraka and Iida ate more than normal. They had to restore their energy. They spent the rest of the day in their room. Izuku wrote everything he learned about unicorns and witches in his notebook. Uraraka made notes for her book of spells, and Iida fell asleep every now and then, even though he tried to stay awake. As Tokiyami told them to, they slept in real beds. Even though the mattress was hard and the bed squeaky, Izuku slept as if he was in heaven. He dreamt of fighting the dragon this night. The prince, whose face he only knew from the newspaper, was chained to a golden throne in the dragon's hideout. "You'll never take my most precious treasure from me, mortal," the dragon growled, and Izuku wanted to say that dragons were just as mortal as he, but as dreams go he couldn't move a muscle and couldn't speak either. "You'll have to answer a question if you want to get past me." Wasn't that the Sphinx's trope? The ladies with the lions' heads. The ones that possessed infinite wisdom and would only let one pass if they solved a riddle. The ground began to shake. The dragon's hideout quivered, the walls began to crumble. Izuku saw how the prince was swallowed by a sea of gold. "What do you call a group of dragons?" The dragon roared, loud enough to drown out the mess of sounds around them. His foul breath hit Izuku in the face. The ground shattered before Izuku could do anything. Through the gaps he noticed a heat. Were they inside a volcano? He was just about to fall into the mix of molten gold and stone, but before he could actually touch it, Uraraka woke him up. "Hey, we need to go. We have to get new armor for Iida and we need to ask around for a dragon." Izuku looked at her, still frightened from the dream. "New armor, sure. We also need a map to the burned forest. Tokiyami told me about it." He climbed out of bed. The others had already packed and were only waiting for him. Quickly he grabbed his backpack and followed his friends out of the door. Luckily there was a blacksmith in the city, and because Iida was the little brother of the famous and popular Iida, Ingenium, Tensai, the smith did her best to help him find the perfect chest piece. She even wanted to give it to them for free, but Iida refused. In the end they agreed that she would send the recipe to Iida's family. Reluctantly Iida gave in, and thus the friends could continue their journey, fully equipped now. The smith showed them the place they were searching for on a map. The lady really had been friendly. Before they left the city, Izuku quickly sent a letter addressed to his mother. He played the incidents that happened down a little, she would worry anyway. Asterisk. The nearer they came to the burned forest, the clearer it became to them that there was indeed something waiting for them. The paranoid and scared looks of the locals followed them whenever they asked for directions. Time after time they got warned to not go near the forest, it was too dangerous, too big a risk. Of course they didn't listen, and thus they were now standing between charred skeletons of trees. Everything around them looked dead, burned and gone. The smoke screen above the forest was not older than a few hours. In the middle of the forest there's a hill or something, Iida said, we should take a look at that. It's in the southeast. While they were walking through the forest their surroundings changed. First Izuku didn't notice, because the changes were that insignificant. But after a short period of time he noticed that the trees were regenerating quickly. Buds grew out of still charred branches, and bushes and other smaller plants began to bloom near the ground. The forest grew to be alive and beautiful in front of their eyes, grew and grew until all the trees full of fresh leaves, and there was no trace of the fire left, even though it couldn't have been more than a few hours since the fire. Izuku had never seen a magic like this before. Sorcerers could make single plants grow to bloom from a seed, but to regenerate a whole forest in a few minutes. Finally they arrived at the hill Iida had seen. When he looked at it closely, Izuku noticed that it was in fact a giant nest from stone. A petrified bird's nest, full of burn marks, a forest that regenerated itself completely from absolute destruction. Everything made sense to Izuku now. Galloping interrupted him, before he could say something. 3 centaurs stormed towards them. You should get away from here. The blonde centaur, the biggest of the 3 said, it can't take it too long to burst into flames again. What will burn? Uraraka asked. The phoenix, Izuku answered in the centaur's place. A phoenix? Iida was surprised, no wonder. There hadn't been any phoenixes for some years. They had all migrated to the south, the immortal loners. It's still very young, so we're taking care of it. It burns every few days, sometimes every few hours, the woman with the long blue hair said. She smiled at the friends, we can get you out of here. You just have to get on. Izuku stared at the woman in wonder. Centaurs were known for their pride, they didn't let people ride them. They really had to be in immediate danger, if they offered it. The 3 centaurs let the friends mount their backs. Iida was being carried by the biggest of the 3, Uraraka mounted the girl, and the black-furred one was left for Izuku. He looked into the man's face and was shocked by the anxiety on it. Tamaki, it's a matter of 1 minute. We're next to you the whole time. Don't worry, he won't do anything to you. The blonde centaur touched the other centaurs, Tamaki's, shoulder lightly. Tamaki nodded and looked to the ground. I'm sorry, Izuku said, if you can't do it I can walk too. The blonde shook his head. That'll take too long, probably. Get on, Tamaki can do it. He's strong. Izuku hoped that it was all right for Tamaki when he held on to his shoulder. The centaur shivered beneath him, but he didn't stumble and Izuku didn't fall either while he was being carried through the forest. Asterisk. The centaurs brought them to the forest's edge. What are you doing here anyways? The blonde asked after he introduced himself as Togata. We thought we spread enough rumors to keep people from going here. As long as the phoenix is still young it dies very often. And it doesn't have any control over its powers, that's why the whole forest burns down with it. It can get dangerous. What's a weird group like you doing here? The woman said, you don't look like people going on a walk. We're searching for the dragon that kidnapped the prince, Izuku explained. He got off Tamaki's back. The centaur seemed to appreciate it. He quickly hid behind Togata and the woman. We thought of a dragon when we heard of the burned forest. Dragons. A Majiki, isn't that guy who visits you from time to time a dragon? And didn't he talk about a prince last time? The black-haired centaur nodded. He seemed to want to say something, but then he turned away and blushed. Izuku couldn't blame him. Talking in front of people was difficult, and talking in front of people you never saw before was even more difficult. For real, could you give us directions to find this dragon? Uraraka asked, excited. The burned forest did help them in the end. Sure, the dragon always comes from the west, and he mentioned that he only needs a few minutes to get here. You'll need 2 days or something to get there then. Say hi from Tamaki, he'll be happy, Mirio said and smiled at them blindingly. But don't you want to stay the night? We can't offer you shelter, but we have something to show you that you'll never see again afterwards, at least not in this country. The death and resurrection of a phoenix. Izuku's mouth was agape. You would show it to us? Sure thing. It should start in a few hours. It's clear then. We'll stay the night and continue our journey to the west tomorrow, Iida said. Great. Asterisk. The bird's scream pierced the tense silence. With a few powerful strokes of its wing it rose into the starless sky. It illuminated the darkness of the night with its burning wings. Single feathers fell from its body and burned to crisp in the air, others fell into the forest and caused fires there. Soon there was a forest fire beneath the dying bird, the dancing flames let the scene shine in a sinister light. A least scream, the fire around the phoenix turned extremely bright and it began to burn. For a moment the bird's skeleton stood in the air, coated with flames, and then it crumbled and fell into the bird's nest with a dull sound. The forest stopped to burn as well. The fires went out and it grew still, dead, but alive as well, for in the moment it stopped burning, the plants began to grow again, just like the live maturing inside the egg. The phoenix was a symbol of beginnings and ends. It fitted them, Izuku thought. He had a feeling that their journey began its end now. Their goal was incredibly near now. A smile on his lips, he fell asleep, dreams filled with burning feathers. Chapter text. The next morning they had to say goodbye to the centaurs. Izuku would have loved to stay longer to learn more about them. Nejire, the blue-haired centaur, woke them up before the sunrise. Tagata and Amajiki are making breakfast, she said, too cheerful and loud, disturbing the quiet of the morning with her voice. Fascinated, he noticed that her blue hair was twisted around her torso. She guided the sleepy friends to the cooking place of the centaurs. Normally centaurs were wild and free, never settled down anywhere, as Izuku's brain supplied helpfully. The horse people roamed the whole world, without a fixed place to stay. These three were different. They built a place to sleep and one to cook. Everything for the phoenix's sake. It was impressive, Izuku thought. Such creatures that loved their freedom so much gave up their most important good for another creature. What made them do it? He was about to ask when the honey-colored and the black fur of the other two centaurs came into view. Tagata was cutting some kind of roots on a tree stump that reached his stomach. Amajiki was kneeling beside a fire in a dent in the ground. It was surrounded by stones so the woods wouldn't catch on fire by accident. On the fire there was a small pot that contained a soup. Izuku noticed that the raven had pulled the hair that was in his face before back and wore it in a ponytail now. When Tagata spotted them he turned around smiling. Good morning. Did you sleep well? He asked while putting the roots into the pot. Amajiki stirred the soup. Then he looked up, noticed the visitors standing in front of him and quickly put the hairband away, so his hair fell into his face again. Breakfast will be ready soon. We also packed some provisions for you, Tagata said. Thanks a lot, Izuku said. Provisions were important. Who knew if they wouldn't be able to catch something or find edible plants on one day? To create food with magic was practically impossible and he couldn't put that load on Uraraka. The soup is ready, a voice he'd never heard before said. Only when he turned around he noticed that he'd never heard the third centaur speak once. They sat down around the fireplace and the centaurs handed them wooden spoons and bowls that Nejire made herself, as she told them proudly. Silently they ate until Izuku asked the question that had been bothering him. Why are you taking care of the phoenix? Nejire opened her mouth but Tagata stopped her. Let Tamaki explain. He can do it best. Huh? Amajiki looked up from his soup. Do I have to, Mirio? Tagata smiled at him. If you really don't want to you don't have to, no. It's really early too. I'll explain for you. Thankful Amajiki turned to his soup again and Tagata began telling the story. He explained that in a city they had heard a lady talk about how much more confidence she had, since she had a child. So Togata and Nejire thought that Amajiki should raise a child too, so he would become more self-confident. Of course Amajiki thought that the idea was a bad one. But a few months later they had found the little phoenix in his burned forest and Amajiki got hooked instantly. It was love at first sight. They decided to stay with the young bird and take care of it until it was old enough to not burst into flames as soon as it grew to full size. "So you're taking care of the phoenix for Amajiki's sake?" Izuku asked. How much did Togata and Nejire like their friend, to give up on their freedom for him? "It has a name," Amajiki mumbled quietly, still hunched over his soup. "Did you finally decide on a name, Tamaki?" Togata asked, the smile on his face growing bigger. They liked him very much, Izuku concluded while looking at the look in Togata's eyes when he looked at Amajiki. Amajiki nodded. "Butterfly. You want to call it Butterfly?" Nejire asked, hiding a laugh behind her hand. "Why not, sun? Mirio is the sun, and I like butterflies," Amajiki muttered and tried to hide behind his bowl of soup. "I think the name is very cute," Uraraka said and sent a reassuring smile the raven's way. "I like the name too," Togata said. "Should we bring Butterfly its food after we said goodbye to our guests?" Amajiki nodded and with that the topic was over. After they finished eating the centaurs gave them a package, filled with dried meat and freshly baked bread. They began their journey towards the mountains, as Togata described it. Because of the wide grass plains between them and the mountains they could already see the rocks in the distance. Izuku was glad that they carried provisions around. Even though there were some rivers in the plains he hadn't seen a single edible plant. There also didn't seem to be any animals in the sea of grass, at least he didn't see any yet. While they were walking Izuku got lost in his own thoughts. When he ignored the noises they made, the clattering of Ida's armor, Uraraka's cheery voice that explained something to her boyfriend, the plains were incredibly quiet. He couldn't help but see this calm as the calm before the storm. At the end of this seemingly endless grass plains there was a dragon waiting for them, at least one. Was it the right one? What if the dragon would be hostile to them? But it was friends with Amajiki, it couldn't be that aggressive, but if it added the prince to its treasure it wouldn't give the prince back easily. Dragons loved their treasure a lot and protected it with all they had. "Midoriya," Ida's voice interrupted his thoughts, "we should find a place to set up the tent and stay the night. Over there the ground is more rocky and we can see the mountains more clearly now too. Also the sun is setting already." While being engrossed in his thoughts he didn't even notice how much time had already passed. He looked around and saw a hollow in the ground, maybe 200 meters in front of them. It was surrounded by some bigger rocks. "Over there we should be safe from the wind," he said. The rocks formed an almost perfect circle around the hollow, there were only small gaps between them. Whatever made nature place the rocks like that, it must have been interesting, we can set up camp there. When they came near the hollow the sun disappeared behind the horizon and the long shadows of the mountains covered the landscape, where grass met rock and stained the area in the colors of the night. Izuku set up the tent. Iida wanted to help him, but he saw the quivering legs and fingers of his friend. He still needed to rest. They should have stayed a day longer in the city, or better, a week. No, that wouldn't be the right way either, that way they wouldn't have made it this far. Uraraka took the first watch, Izuku the second and Iida the third. When Uraraka woke him he felt like he just went to sleep. Silently they communicated and Izuku told her to sleep well. He watched when she laid down next to the peacefully slumbering Iida and smiled. Then he went to sit next to the fire outside. The magical flames burned on the bare rock. Luckily it didn't need fuel to keep burning, otherwise they'd be pretty helpless in these plains without a single tree in sight. Nothing happened on his watch. Izuku yawned, felt small tears prickle at the corner of his eyes. Should he wake Iida up or let him sleep for a whole night? He thought about it for a moment and decided that he wanted Iida's full power back and could handle a night with little sleep in turn. To stay awake surprisingly wasn't very difficult. He distracted himself by looking at the stars that were scattered all across the sky. After some time the fire went out, but he thought that it had something to do with Uraraka sleeping too deep to keep it burning. Without the light the stars shone even brighter, and Izuku was fascinated by the dark jet black of the sky that was filled with thousands of lights. Somehow he wanted to have someone by his side, someone he could share this beautiful view with, and maybe that someone would even know something about stars, so Izuku could learn some more things about stars and constellations. He was too engrossed in his daydreams that he didn't notice two figures sneaking around the camp, muffling their sneering with their hands. Asterisk. The sun was already rising when Izuku went to the tent to wake up Uraraka and Iida. He sported dark circles around his eyes, but his smile came to him naturally when he saw his friends sleeping inside the tent. Uraraka slept close to her boyfriend and had her arms wrapped around his neck. One of his arms had pulled her closer, and the both of them had smiles on their faces. Izuku almost felt sorry for having to wake them up. When they woke up and came out of the tent, Izuku thought that the two of them surely would have gazed at the stars together. Iida was angry at Izuku for taking his shift, of course, but Izuku saw thankfulness in Uraraka's eyes. Iida still needed to rest, whether he wanted to or not. When they finished packing and wanted to leave the camp, Iida ran into something, stumbled and fell to the ground. The loud clattering his armor made startled Izuku, and instantly he was highly alert, conscious of any dangers waiting for them. What made Iida fall? While Izuku was looking around, Uraraka helped Iida stand up. Izuku found a weird, almost transparent material that was stretched out between all the surrounding rocks on the height of their ankles. It was probably slung around the rocks. Curiously he approached the material. It wasn't transparent everywhere, some parts of it were almost white. It was thin like paper and made of individual strips, every single one about as wide as 2 fingers. When he reached out to one of the strips he saw a spark and felt a sharp pain, before he let go of it with a surprised cry of pain. Midoriya! He heard his friends' worried voices as if they were calling out to him from far, far away. He shook his head to free himself from the weird sensation the shock brought with it. Careful! He called out to them, that stuff is cursed or something. He stood up and dusted himself down, then he looked around again. The material, whatever it was, really surrounded the whole camp completely, but it wasn't trapping them inside, it was just above the ground after all. Who or what made the effort to arrange this? And when? He was on watch the whole time, wasn't he? How didn't he notice it? Just when he tried to remember, if anything strange happened at night, he heard something. Was someone laughing? Carefully he approached the noise. That was definitely laughter. He found the source of the laughter behind one of the rocks. 2 young men were crouching behind it snickering. They didn't seem to notice that Izuku was looking down on them from the rock, so he could observe them carefully. One of them had blonde hair that almost reached his chin. On the left side the hair sported an interesting black streak that reminded Izuku of lightning. On his head the man wore a hat that was decorated with a huge feather. The other had black hair that was tied into a low ponytail. Except for simple brown trousers and leather shoes he wasn't wearing anything. Izuku noticed that the blonde wasn't wearing an actual shirt either, instead a cloak covered his shoulders. In front of his chest there were some cords holding it in place. He felt his cheeks heating up when his look fell on the bare skin the both of them showed. He looked to the side, too embarrassed to continue looking at the prominent abs the 2 men had. The 2 of them hadn't noticed them yet, too engrossed were they in laughing. Now Uraraka and Iida were standing next to him and also looked at the laughing men below. An evil grin appeared on her face. "What are you laughing about?" she asked loudly. The boys jumped, startled by her sudden words. Izuku and Iida were in front of them immediately and backed them against the rock. Their swords were pointed at the 2 of them, even though they didn't really seem that dangerous. The men lifted their hands in surrender and Izuku saw something blink. A silver earring hung from the raven's ear. The metal glinted in the sunlight. Izuku couldn't make out what the ornament represented, but it was made of a frame from multiple silver parts and silver wires which formed a pattern between the parts of the frame. The startled expressions on the faces of the men vanished and were replaced by amused ones. They looked at each other and grinned. "Looks like we got busted," the raven said. The blonde nodded. "However will we escape this gruesome prison?" The sarcasm dripping from their words was hard to overhear. The both of them were incredibly confident, even though in their situation it was clearly Izuku and his friends who were in the advantage. "Hey, are you ignoring me?" Uraraka asked. "Dear lady, we would never," the blonde assured her with a mock bow. "So, escape plans. Should we stay for a moment, to hear what they're doing in this beautiful desolation, or should we make off immediately?" his companion asked. "We're searching for Prince Todoroki," Izuku said. The situation was very strange to him. What did two young men like those two do here, in the middle of nowhere? The dumb prank they pulled on them was a thing, but they didn't really seem dangerous. Maybe they could help them. He was kidnapped by a dragon and we want to rescue him. Do you know anything about that? The grin on their faces grew wider. By chance, we do know a lot about this so-called kidnapping, the blonde said. Yes, the other agreed, for example that it was in fact not one, but 4 dragons. And that it wasn't a kidnapping, but more of a rescue. And that the prince planned all of it by himself, at least he helped a whole lot. And the prince is very happy in his new home. Izuku swallowed hard. He didn't think it would be that many dragons. And what was the rescue thing supposed to mean? And what was that about the prince helping to plan all of it? Wait a second. Iida interrupted. Why do the two of you know so much about this? The men looked at each other. From this angle Izuku could see the earring better. Now he noticed that the frame was made of 5 bones, fingers. The exquisite pattern the silver wires formed between the fingers looked like the membrane of a wing. The wing of a dragon. Well, Mr. City Guard, the blonde said with a pointed look at Iida's armor. He saluted Iida with another mock bow. We humbly introduce ourselves, Kaminari Denki. And Shiro Hanta, the raven continued Kaminari's sentence. They looked directly into Izuku's eyes. A shiver ran down his spine when he saw that their eyes had transformed. The cold reptile eyes seemed to look right into the depths of his soul. Synchronized they ended their sentence. Dragon shapeshifters. Stay back. Izuku screamed and grabbed Uraraka and Iida's wrists to get them away from the danger. Looking back Izuku saw that the faces of the two were stretching, becoming longer. They grew. Their arms and legs developed strong muscles and their spines became longer too. With a sickening crack their scapulae split open and with the horrible sound of bones popping, 2 pairs of leathery wings spread, desperate to be used again, to carry the gigantic bodies to the sky once more. The soft, human skin was replaced by brilliant scales. There were 2 dragons standing in front of them and never before had Izuku seen something more beautiful than the transformation he just witnessed. The monsters possessed a dreadful beauty, a ferocious elegance, a horrifying grace like he'd never seen one before. One of the dragons was way bigger than Izuku. If it wanted to, it could have snapped him in half with its giant jaw without a problem. Its scales were of an electric yellow, interrupted a few times by a lightning pattern, similar to that in Kaminari's hair. The other dragon was a lot smaller, only a little taller than Iida. It stood in front of them. The wings of this specimen were jagged and looked like they were really sharp. They were colored in an odd pattern of black, white and orange hues. The scales were of the same colors. The bigger dragon, Kaminari, threw his head back and let out a deafening roar. Then the two of them took off. The wind they made almost knocked Izuku off his feet. His mouth hanging open in wonder he looked after the dragons who were flying towards the mountains, until they were as small as toys. From one of the highest mountains another dragon flew towards them. It was almost as tall as Kaminari's dragon, at least as far as they could tell. It had a reddish color. It greeted the other two, by flying around them. Iida recollected himself first. Well, at least we know the dragon's hiding spot now. Uraraka took a deep breath, as if to calm herself down. Had she been holding her breath for all this time? Then she straightened up and looked towards the mountains. We can make this distance today, she said, a smile on her face. Izuku felt better immediately. Right, it's not that far from here. And we even know which mountain it is. It's the flat-topped big one. It looks as if it was cut, Izuku said. We shouldn't waste time then, Iida said, pointing towards the mountain. Let's go. After some time the friends arrived at the mountain. Now Izuku realized why the mountain had this strange flat top. The hardened scoria at the base of the mountain didn't leave any doubts. This mountain was a volcano. It made sense that dragons, known as creatures of fire, lived inside a fire-spitting mountain. While they searched the volcano for traces of the dragons, Izuku concluded that the volcano couldn't have had any eruptions in the last few years. The area around it was more vegetated than the rocky plains behind them. There were plants growing everywhere, and he even saw some small trees growing here. But that it didn't erupt for some time didn't mean that it was extinct. It could very well be sleeping. Other than the dragons, they couldn't just fly away if it should become dangerous though. Wait, Izuku was reminded of a memory that was similar to this situation. He tried to get a hold of it. Something about a volcano and an eruption had been on his mind not too long ago. He rummaged through his memories, but couldn't find anything. Whenever he thought that it was right on the tip of his tongue, it slipped through his fingers like a fish and disappeared in the deep waters of his subconscious. There's a cave over there, Uraraka interrupted his thinking. About 20 meters above them there was the entrance to a cave, hidden behind a ledge and barely big enough for Siro's dragon to pass through. But even if a dragon couldn't enter the cave, a human could, without problems too. We should go check it out, Izuku said, and thus they began climbing. He searched for a safe way to reach the entrance. Iida was the first to arrive at the entrance. He stared into the darkness for a moment and turned around to face them again. There's light inside the cave. I think it gets bigger there too. The two others followed him and they walked along a corridor towards the bigger cave. First Izuku was blinded by the sudden light in the room, but then his vision cleared and he could see something. The corridor led them to a room bigger than any room Izuku had seen before. The ceiling was high above their heads and the wall on the opposite side was too far away from the light source to make it out. On the right wall there was a horse inside a makeshift fence, munching on some hay. Next to it there was a saddle on the ground. On the other side of the cave a dragon slept, the giant red one. It really was just a little smaller than Kaminari and was curled up with its head on its front feet. The red scales reflected the light from the torches that were scattered around the cave and made an interesting pattern on the wall. On its curled tail there was Kaminari, sleeping soundly. He used his cloak as a blanket and his hat covered his face. He was snoring so FLT. Siro was standing with his back towards them but turned around to them grinning. "Hello," he said, "you really came here. We already thought you ran away when you heard of 4 dragons. But your mission is noble and admirable. You can't just turn around and go back home, can you?" Izuku frowned. This dragon irritated him. Was he happy or upset that they wanted to rescue the prince now? "Where is the prince?" he demanded. A snort from the direction of the red dragon was heard. One of its red eyes opened and Izuku took a step back. The dragon's eyes were too scary for him. The red dragon bared its sharp teeth. 2 rows of teeth blinked inside of its blunt snout. Izuku was surprised at the diversity among dragons. He was sure that Siro and Kaminari's snouts had been longer, and he was pretty sure that Kaminari had only had 1 row of teeth. The red dragon looked more muscular than its friends in their dragon forms too. "Be quiet," the dragon grumbled, "Kaminari's asleep." He, at least as far as Izuku could tell from the voice it was a male, looked at the 3 friends intensely. "Todoroki is out with Bakugo. You shouldn't disturb them. We want to rescue the prince," Iida said. "Tell us where he is and we'll leave you alone." Even though he was facing one of the most dangerous creatures in the world, Iida was composed. He didn't bat an eye. Izuku imagined him as the commander of the royal guard, wearing the famous white armor and an army behind him. His friend would become a great knight. The red dragon grinned, as far as a dragon could grin. "You can try to rescue him. I don't think Bakugo and he'll let you, though. They're on top of the mountain, at the crater." Confused, the friends left the cave. Siro waved after them. "They're really strange dragons," Uraraka said while they began climbing up to the mountain top. "Little aggression. None of them breathed fire yet, and they don't seem to have treasure either," Izuku agreed. "The only dragon-like thing they did was kidnapping a prince. Maybe it's because they're shapeshifters." "Most likely," Iida said. "They seem to be civilized. They even have a horse." "That's the prince's horse, I think," Uraraka said, and Izuku nodded in agreement. The saddle next to that fence had the royal crest, he explained. Discussing, they continued their climbing. When they arrived at the top, the moon was already shining. Izuku was the first to reach the top plateau, and he took a moment to look around. The beauty of the view stole his breath away for a second. The volcanic crater was filled with water that shone silver with the moon's light. Small waves, caused by the wind, rippled the surface of the water and made the moonlight glisten and sparkle. The silver lake was a crass contrast to the starless and therefore black sky and the rock around the water that was just as dark. In front of the lake there were two silhouettes, sitting next to each other. A dragon, barely bigger than Siro's dragon form, sat next to a human person. When Izuku approached them, he saw that the dragon had the young man's wrist in a tight hold with the tip of his tail. It looked a little like handcuffs. Was this how they kept the prince captive? With a guard dragon holding onto him all the time? He could see the dragon better now. The moonlight made the colors look different, but he made out orange scales with black accents and black wings that had orange edges. Another pair of smaller wings grew out of his head. They didn't seem to have a purpose, they looked like decorations. Izuku recognized the man sitting next to the dragon as the prince immediately. The red and white hair and the royally blue uniform were characteristics he knew from the newspaper. Prince Todoroki, Izuku called, and the two of them turned around. Two pairs of eyes, one red dragon's eyes, the other heterochromatic blue and gray human eyes, scanned him. The glowing lake behind them painted them in an unsettling light. Izuku felt hot and cold shivers run down his spine while the prince and the dragon watched him. It was similar to the feeling this morning, when he had seen the dragons for the first time, just a little different. He stuttered, "We're here to rescue you." The sentence came out more of a question than a heroic claim. The dragon took some steps towards him, didn't let go of the prince in the process. It was surprisingly fast, but Izuku shouldn't be surprised by that anymore. He did meet 3 other dragons before, but something was so very different about this dragon. His heart rate picked up. "What the air you saying, you little wannabe?" The dragon stopped mid-sentence, or mid-insult. His male voice indicated that. Red eyes widened full of surprise and his jaw dropped. The dragon's facial expressions were almost comically human. It would have been funny if he wasn't standing in front of a dangerous monster at the moment. Deku. Izuku stared at the dragon in confusion. There had been only one person in his life who called him that. It had been the son of a traveling merchant family. They stopped their traveling before Uraraka and Ida's families had moved to their village. Until then, Bakugo Katsuki had been Izuku's only friend his age. Didn't the red dragon mention a Bakugo? He didn't pay attention to the name back then, because the information about the prince had been his priority at that time. Kachan? Izuku asked, the old nickname coming to him naturally. He was just as surprised as the dragon. "That's Deku." The prince, who was still sitting next to the dragon, asked in a calm voice. He got up. The prince was a bit taller than Izuku. Just now Izuku noticed that the prince was holding the tip of the dragon's tail in his hand by himself. And the tail wasn't wrapped around the wrist in a tight grip, like he had assumed before. It was more of a gentle embrace. It looked a little like jewelry. Next to the prince, the dragon transformed into a muscular, ash-blonde boy. He was about as old as Izuku and wore a red cloak with a fair furred collar and orange arm protectors. On his naked chest there were several colorful necklaces. Their beads reminded Izuku of claws or fangs. Both of his ears were pierced, each one with a single red earring that also reminded him of claws or fangs. Izuku looked into the boy's face. He was older now. It wasn't the round, childlike face he knew, but that was definitely Kachan. "What are you here for, you nerd? Do you want to steal my prince away from me now, Deku?" Izuku didn't understand anything anymore. Uraraka and Iida, who had arrived by now and were standing next to him, looked even more confused. Of course, they didn't know Kachan. The prince touched Kachan's arm to calm him down and looked him into the eyes. "If that's your Deku, he will let us explain ourselves. If he doesn't want to listen to our story, he isn't the Deku you told me about, Katsuki. And if he still wants to rescue me afterwards, I'll gladly allow you to throw him off of this volcano." "As if we'd let something like that happen," Uraraka exclaimed, but Izuku held her back. They want to explain. We should listen to their story, he said and threw a challenging look at the prince and the dragon shifter, who turned out to be his childhood friend. Kachan, who calmed down since the prince touched him, snorted. The prince squeezed his arm and rubbed his thumb along Kachan's bicep. The intimate gesture made Izuku blush and Kachan shut up. He noticed that the two of them worked together splendidly. It was as if they communicated with each other the whole time, without using words. Their harmony made them seem like they'd worked as a team for a long time. He wondered what happened to form a duo like them. I'm going to tell you how I ended up with this idiot now. The prince only smiled fondly at the shapeshifter's protest and began to tell the story. Chapter text. Prince Todoroki Shoto, prodigy and future king, if his father had his way, had everything a child could wish for. According to his father at least. He had the best teachers that taught him arithmetic, how to read, how to write, how to use his magic, about the history of the kingdom. The best swordsman and the best archer taught him fighting, together with the best hand-to-hand combatant. In his room there was an enormous bookshelf, completely filled with books. The castle was home to the best healers of the kingdom, who helped him every time he got injured during this training. This only happened when the king himself decided to pay his son a visit to teach him something, to train him. These visits almost always ended with broken bones, blood, and tears from Shoto. He had all of that. But what the young prince most prominently had was loneliness. Ever since the events with his mother, she lived in a separate part of the castle and he wasn't allowed to see her. He wasn't really sure if he wanted to, so he didn't ask. This way he lived on, day by day, hidden from the public by his father, studying, fighting, so he could one day become king and an acclaimed hero, the goal his father didn't quite reach. Asterisk. When he was 10 years old, Shoto sneaked off to the city. There was an annual fair there and his curiosity had been awoken by the loud, cheerful voices and the music. Hidden under a gray cloak he got from a servant he walked along the booths. Everything was loud and strange to him. Every booth offered something different, every kind of food imaginable, trinkets that promised to possess magical power. He came to a halt to look up to the brightly illuminated Ferris wheel, when someone crashed into him. Something fell to the ground and he heard someone curse. "Watch where you stand, idiot," the boy next to him said. He was a little taller than Shoto and was holding an empty ice cream cone in his hand. His hair stood from his head in ash blonde spikes and his red eyes, full of anger, looked at him. "I'm sorry," Shoto said, even though he didn't really do anything. He looked at the ice cream that was slowly melting on the floor. "I'll buy you a new one." Grumbling about Shoto's stupidity, the other boy brought him to an ice cream booth and ordered new ice cream. Shoto paid for it with the money he brought from the castle. After he got his ice cream, the boy turned around without another word and walked away. Shoto followed him. "Why are you trailing after me like a chick after its mother hen?" the boy asked after a while. He already finished the ice cream. Shoto ignored the question. "What's your name?" The boy rolled his eyes. "Bakugo Katsuki. And now get lost." "I'm Shoto," Shoto said instead and smiled a small smile hidden by his hood. "Did I ask?" The smile disappeared again. "Are you still mad about the ice cream?" "Damn right," Bakugo Katsuki said. Shoto tilted his head. "But isn't the fair a place to have fun?" "I'm having fun," Katsuki said. "If you don't believe me, I'll show you how much fun I'm having." He took Shoto's wrist and dragged him along with him, back to the Ferris wheel he admired before. "You see that?" he asked. "That thing is so boring. It stops all the time and the gondolas are really cramped and you can't breathe in there. Whatever sorcerer thought this thing up must have had a weird sense of fun." Shoto still thought that the illuminated wheel looked pretty, but he kept quiet and listened to the boy next to him. "But this over there," he pointed at a weird-looking ride that floated a few meters above the ground and was driving on a road of light very quickly, "that one's fun. It's fast and you feel the wind in your hair and your whole body tingles. Let's ride that one." Shoto nodded and smiled a small smile. He was happy that the other boy wasn't mad at him anymore. They spent hours at the fair, tried different rides, some of which Shoto didn't feel the need to know how the magic of them worked, and they ate weird foods that were either really greasy or sweet. It was completely different from anything Shoto had known until now. The wide grin on his new friend's face didn't disappear the whole evening. They said goodbye because Shoto had to go back to the castle. "Thank you," he said, because he felt like he had to thank Katsuki. "What for?" the boy asked. Shoto shrugged. He didn't know either. He turned around to get going, but Katsuki's voice made him stop. "Let's go to a park and go on an adventure tomorrow," he said. "I'll be waiting for you at the eastern tower of the wall, at noon. Don't be late." Shoto turned around again and looked him in the face. The grin had turned into an honest smile. He smiled at Katsuki and then disappeared between two houses to follow his secret path to the castle. The next day they met to go to one of the parks in the city. Katsuki showed him the plants and explained what kind they were, very proud that he knew which plants were edible and which ones weren't, which ones held significance to sorcerers and witches and which ones didn't. Thanks to his lessons, Shoto knew about all the plants as well, but he was glad that Katsuki was so happy and kept quiet. After a few hours the boys were tired and took a break. The both of them were lying in the flowering grass, the afternoon sun warm on their skin. Shoto closed his eyes. "How old are you?" Katsuki asked. "I'm turning 11 soon." "I'll be turning 11 in winter," Shoto answered. "Then I'm older than you," Katsuki said happily. Shoto nodded. The warmth made him sleepy. "My parents are merchants in the city," his friend began to tell. "We only just moved here. Before that we traveled all the time." "I never left the city," Shoto said and avoided the topic of his parents. He had a bad feeling about letting Katsuki know that he was the prince. He didn't want him to know. They talked, or rather, Katsuki talked and Shoto commented from time to time. "You're pretty smart, aren't you?" Katsuki asked after a while, when they were talking about different types of potions. He questioned why Katsuki knew so much about that. "I think you're smarter," he said carefully, didn't want to make the other mad. "Do you know how to fight?" Of course he knew how to fight. "Let's test who is stronger," Katsuki said and got up. Shoto did the same. He was better at fighting than the other boy. He had the speed and technique it took to ward off the first blow. One fluid move and the other boy fell to the ground. Katsuki grinned up to him, wildly, a spark of excitement in his eyes. "I'll win next time." Next time turned into many times and soon Shoto sneaked out of the castle almost every day to spend a few hours with Katsuki. They were friends. Even though they sparred a lot, they also explored the city together, Shoto always careful so nobody recognized him. Until now he always managed to avoid guards and the common folk didn't know what he looked like, because his father never made his existence public. Not even Katsuki knew who he was. He didn't really care about it, Shoto thought. Today Katsuki showed him the marketplace. His family had a booth there too. Wide-eyed he looked at all the fruit and the vegetables the farmers brought from the rural areas around the city, but Katsuki dragged him away at the wrist to look at a booth with parrots in cages. The exotic birds had different colors and sizes and they made strange noises. Some even sounded like they were trying to speak. Shoto knew some things about the animals, because one of his teachers told him of them. He just hadn't seen a living specimen. "The green one reminds me of Deku," Katsuki said and Shoto examined the bird in question more closely. Gorgeous, dark green feathers decorated the small parrot that sat in its cage sleeping. Shoto didn't know exactly who this, Deku, was, but Katsuki talked about them often. He suspected a late pet or something along the way. They didn't seem to be in the city, otherwise Katsuki would have brought them along for sure. Whenever he told of them a tiny spark of sadness blinked in Katsuki's eyes. He tried to hide it behind his usual grin or anger, but Shoto saw it anyway. He really missed this Deku. While they stood there and he saw Katsuki looking at the parrot with a fondness in his eyes he didn't think the other was capable of, Shoto made a decision. This afternoon after he said goodbye, he sent a member of the guard, Iida Tensai, whom he trusted not to ask questions and not to report everything he did to his father, to the booth to purchase the parrot. The next day he couldn't wait to get to the place where they always met up, a clearing in a park near the wall, but not near enough for the guards to notice them. It lay hidden from other visitors of the park too. The sun's golden rays fell through the red leaves and flecked the ground with their light. The crisp autumn air made Shoto shiver. He wrapped his coat around him more tightly, careful not to disturb the cage or accidentally let go of the cage. The 10-year-old had problems to carry the cage, but he did his best not to let it touch the ground. Finally he arrived and could let go of the cage. The bird inside made a noise. Shoto smiled. Katsuki would love this present. He sat down on a half-decayed tree stump at the edge of the clearing and waited for his friend. It took some time for him to arrive. The sun was low in the sky when he heard the signature loud steps. Shoto pocketed the book he brought with him. "You've been waiting for long?" Katsuki asked as he came running. "Not for long, no," Shoto said. He watched as the other came to a halt in front of him, slightly out of breath. "I need to go back soon. My parents need help in their store and I ran away to tell you." "You have to help your parents in their store?" Shoto asked. Once again he was surprised how different Katsuki's life was from his. "I'm 11 already, I can do that," Katsuki growled. Of course he took Shoto's words as provocation. "I have a present for you," Shoto said and thus avoided a fight. He showed him the cage he hid behind the tree stump. "That's the bird from yesterday," Katsuki said. His eyes sparkled. "I sent someone to buy it," Shoto said, glad that Katsuki was happy. "It reminds you of Deku." Katsuki was speechless. He stared at Shoto for a solid minute before turning away and mumbling a thank you. Then he took the cage and ran away. Shoto saw his flaming cheeks anyway. "I need to go back to my parents." Shoto waved at him. Now they had really become friends. His first friend. When he was 12 years old, Todoroki Enji, King Endeavor decided that the parade for his birthday was the perfect opportunity to present the crown prince to the public for the first time. This morning he had to put on a pompous uniform, made for this purpose only, instead of his usual, rather simple clothes. The servants made a lot of fuss about the parade. Sure, it was their king's birthday. Even though the king wasn't as popular as the acclaimed hero of the country, currently the leader of the royal guard, he was respected and liked among the citizens. He was the king who brought peace to the kingdom after all. The parade was grand and loud and he had to stand closer to his father than he was comfortable with, but he still smiled like he was told to. All the people around him looked happy and he was glad that they were feeling good. He hoped that Katsuki was happy too, even though Shoto couldn't come to see him today. The wagon he and his father stood on turned a corner and Shoto saw familiar, ash-blonde hair. Bakugo Katsuki was standing between a man and a woman who looked exactly like his friend. They were probably his parents. The family looked at the parade. Shoto watched how Katsuki's eyes wandered, took the crown in, the wagon that was emitting magical confetti from the front, the wagon itself that floated a meter above the ground and was moving forward steadily, like the paper boat they made in spring floated down the stream. Shoto saw how Katsuki's head worked, trying to understand what kind of magic was responsible for it. His eyes went on, taking the king in, whose flames burned proudly, high into the sky. Then his gaze fell on the smaller person next to the king. The prince, Todoroki Shoto. Katsuki looked directly into his eyes. Shoto startled when he saw Katsuki's expression change. Instead of the curiousness he saw before, something hardened in his eyes and he looked away. Shoto swallowed around the clump that had formed in his throat. What did that mean now? Before the wagon turned the corner, Shoto caught Katsuki's stare again. His lips formed a word. Tomorrow. Right, they'd talk tomorrow. The rest of the day was over in a rush. He didn't really notice how Endeavor displayed him like a pretty little trophy. He didn't remember anything, except for Katsuki's cold, hard eyes. The next day Shoto arrived at the clearing well too early. He sat down on the tree stump and waited. Katsuki seemed to have wanted to come as fast as possible too, because he arrived only half an hour later and sat down next to him without a word. They were silent for a while, none of them really knew what to say. "So you're the crown prince," Katsuki said after a while. Shoto nodded. "It's not like I chose to." Before he could try and justify himself, Katsuki interrupted him. "Don't say sorry. I'm not telling you everything about me either. I hate lies, but you didn't really lie. You cleverly avoided the topic for 2 years." Shoto looked to the ground. Katsuki's words didn't really make anything better and he seemed to notice. Can you use the king's elemental magic too? He asked to distract Shoto rather than trying to make something better. Reluctantly Shoto nodded. He didn't want to use the powers he'd been born with, but in theory he too was an elemental. My mother was a sorceress, the best there was, some say. My father married her for that. Katsuki didn't pry any further. He probably noticed that his father was a sore topic for Shoto. So you can use magic. A little, not much. I have lessons, but I have to concentrate on a lot of things so I'll probably never become a sorcerer. And I found something interesting lately. He showed Katsuki his right hand and made his mother's magic course through his veins. Frost formed on the hand and the air around cooled down. I think this is the result of powerful magic and elemental magic mixing. Next time we spar you need to use your magic, Katsuki said excitedly. The thought seemed to motivate him. How am I supposed to get better than you, if you never use your full potential, Prince Bastard? Shoto didn't say that he was better at fighting than Katsuki even without using his magic. Next time? He asked instead, we're still friends. Friends? Katsuki said and looked into Shoto's face, we never stopped being friends. Shoto felt a single tear run down his cheek. Thank God. He whispered, I thought you hated me. I don't hate you, Katsuki said, and when Shoto looked at him, the 13-year-old smiled an honest smile. When he saw it, his heart pounded in his chest. He hadn't been this happy in his entire life. They were still friends. Over the years they continued to meet. They sparred a lot, talked less, but talking wasn't necessary. With their fights they created a routine that let the other know if something was wrong or he needed space or simply needed a distraction. Mostly Shoto wanted to distract himself from his father, but sometimes Katsuki needed Shoto's support too. And even though Katsuki liked to say it, they didn't fight to win. They just had fun sparring, to find out who was the better fighter. Shoto rarely used his magic, in fear of hurting Katsuki, but when they were 14 years old, almost 4 years after their first encounter, there was no reason to be careful anymore. Hey Shoto! Katsuki greeted him as he joined him on the clearing. Katsuki was sitting on the ground in the snow. The new year was only a few days old and since it began it had been snowing continuously. Not a lot, but just enough to over the city with a thin, white layer. The park wasn't any different. His friend didn't give him a chance to reply to the greeting but continued to talk. I learned something new. Now you don't have to be inconsiderate of me when we spar. Katsuki had picked up the habit of swearing a lot lately. He swore before too, but recently it had become a lot more frequent. Shoto was curious where it had come from. What did you learn? He asked curiously. Katsuki beamed with pride. He grinned at Shoto and Shoto shivered. Something was different about his eyes. I'll show you. The other boy's body began to change. His back grew in length and he fell down on all fours. His face became longer and shark teeth grew out of his mouth, so did wings out of his back. His whole body was decorated with beautiful scales. A small dragon sat in front of Shoto and looked as smug as it was possible with his dragon's face. Shoto's mouth hung open when he stepped closer to Katsuki. Carefully he traced the leathery wing with one finger. The wings were black with orange edges and Shoto had never seen anything more beautiful. Dragon Katsuki shivered and turned away, so his hand touched the warm scales instead. You're a dragon shifter, Shoto said excitedly and had to resist the urge to hug the dragon's long neck. He was pretty sure that Katsuki's aversion to physical contact was the same in his dragon form. The scales vibrated with the dragon's low growl. Shoto's hand was still resting on them. He liked the feeling of the scales under his fingers. My mom told me that someone in our family could turn into a dragon, so I tried if I could do it too. And here I am. He shifted back and stood in front of him again. It was as if nothing happened. Shoto had pulled his hand back while he transformed and missed the smoothness of the scales. Why don't you lose your clothes when you shift? He asked the first question that came to his mind. Katsuki turned red and looked away to hide the redness from him. You're asking why I'm not naked before you question why I can turn into a dragon. Exactly, Shoto said, even though Katsuki was right. It was a pretty dumb question, considering their situation. It's some weird magic thing. Katsuki said, I don't know shit about shapeshifters, you're the one with the best teachers of this country. And now prepare to fight a dragon, Prince Bastard. Shoto smiled and took his winter coat off. From now on their sparring session would become more interesting. Asterisk. Shoto stumbled through the forest. He almost slipped on wet leaves or mud on the ground and cursed the autumn rain that was pouring down on him. His father had lost a debate against All Might, the head of the royal guard, and needed to direct his anger at something. He had called for him and insisted on a special lesson. They sparred, or at least the king called it sparring. He felt dizzy remembering how Endeavor hit him, the fire roaring around him, parching his clothes and his hair. It had never been this bad before, at least it felt like it hadn't. Instead of going to see a healer, he had set his eyes on this destination immediately. His face was twisted in pain as he walked through the forest. He couldn't walk properly because one of his feet hurt like hell and he was clutching his injured arm tightly. He saw blood trickling down his left hand and was overly aware of his other wounds. His shirt was soaked with a mixture of rain and blood. He was an hour late and almost didn't expect Katsuki to be waiting for him, but was glad when he saw the familiar blonde hair. Katsuki, he said, way too quiet, too weak. It sounded like a cry for help. The taste of blood spread in his mouth. Did he bite his lips? Katsuki turned around and ran towards him quickly. He was smaller than Shoto, because he had grown after Katsuki's 17th birthday. About 10 centimeters divided them. What the happened to you, Shoto? Katsuki asked and grabbed Shoto's shoulder. Without wanting to he flinched, but this was Katsuki, just Katsuki, the boy he'd trust with his life. Who is the bastard who did this to you? Shoto looked down at his friend. Endeavor, he whispered. Blood dripped from his fingers onto the ground and it also ran from his lips, down his chin. Before any of them could say anything else, Shoto felt a new, hot pain coursing through his body and he bent over. He threw up on the ground, neither really noticing the hand that was rubbing gentle circles into his back nor Katsuki's voice that was whispering soft words that didn't really mean anything, just meant to soothe him. When his stomach calmed down, Katsuki helped him to get up. Lean on me, he said, I'll take you home with me. You aren't sleeping in that shitty castle today, not near this man. For Shoto the way to Katsuki's house was blurry, his eyes didn't seem to focus. Everything hurt and his friend almost carried him. Before they arrived anywhere he felt too dizzy and closed his eyes. Katsuki would get them to their destination. Only when he felt a bed underneath him he dared to open his eyes again. The room was simple, a bed, a big bookshelf and a table with one chair. A drawer stood in the corner and on the table there was a cage. Inside there was the parrot, Deku, he gave to Katsuki years ago. Kachan. The bird said, Kachan is cool. All Might is the best. Kachan. Hero. All Might. Kachan. Shut the up, dumb bird, Katsuki growled as he walked into the room. He reached through the bars of the cage and petted the parrot's head, scratched the soft feathers there. The smile on his face was so soft that Shoto's heart throbbed. The love Katsuki obviously felt for the bird was written on his face so clearly that Shoto almost felt jealous. Just now Katsuki seemed to notice Shoto staring, because he pulled his hand back quickly. A slight blush colored his cheeks. I'm treating your wounds, he said and pointed to the floor, where a box stood. Inside were bandages and some medicine and potions. Shoto nodded and took his shirt off, so Katsuki could access the wounds more easily. He flinched when the fabric grazed the injuries. Katsuki swallowed audibly when he saw Shoto's bare torso. Was it because of the wounds or? Shoto was distracted from his thoughts when Katsuki got a bowl of hot water and put it on the bed, then he sat down next to Shoto. Let me clean you up, he said and Shoto nodded. The water's warmth was different from his father's flames heat and he closed his eyes to take the feeling of the soft cloth on his skin in. Katsuki cleaned him, careful not to hurt him. When he was finished he patched him up and gave him a fresh shirt, one of his probably. It lacked in length but was too wide for him. Katsuki may have been smaller than him, but he definitely had more muscles than him. The cheeks of his friend were still tinged slightly red and Shoto decided to tease him a little, to show him that he was feeling better. So, he said, Who is Kachan? Katsuki's face became flaming red again and he bared his teeth. Shut up. Your injury doesn't mean that I'll go easy on you. Katsuki, don't be impolite to our guest, a female voice yelled through the door. He knows me, old hag. And be quiet yourself. She was Katsuki's mother then. Shoto began to get a slight idea where Katsuki got his cursing habit from. The similarities between the two of them were obvious. I have soup for you two here, she called without reducing her volume. Then they heard steps. She walked downstairs. Katsuki got the soup and gave Shoto one bowl. Silently they ate their soup. This is my room, but if you want to, you can sleep in the guest room too. His friend spoke in a strange tone, weirdly kind, soft. Otherwise I'll sleep in the guest room tonight. Can't you sleep here? Shoto asked. He didn't want to say that he was afraid of sleeping alone, but the thought of staying in this room all alone terrified him. He wouldn't be able to sleep if Katsuki left him alone. Sure, Katsuki replied, I'll just go and get the mattress. Shoto nodded and watched Katsuki, as he disappeared from the room and reappeared a moment later with a mattress. Then he prepared a place to sleep for himself. Hey, he said after a while, why does this bastard hurt you like this? Shoto was happy that Katsuki didn't refer to the king as his father. I don't know, he whispered, it's been like this since he thought me old enough. He calls it training. Katsuki went silent for a moment. Is your face? No. He didn't want to talk about his mother now. Maybe another time. They changed the topic and talked about trivial things until the both of them fell asleep. The next morning he was the most wanted person in the capital. They sneaked around between houses, as if they were wanted criminals and not the crown prince and his friend. Once they almost got caught, if Katsuki hadn't grabbed his hand and pulled him back into the shadow of the house they were just hiding in. His palm was bigger than Shoto's and clamming with sweat. While they ran away, Shoto interlocked their fingers. He felt his heart beat excitedly, when Katsuki reciprocated the gesture by squeezing his hand lightly. Finally they arrived in the park. Out of breath they lay on the clearing, between the colorful leaves that had fallen from the trees. They looked towards the dull sky, full of heavy, dark clouds. Shoto was still holding Katsuki's hand when fat raindrops began to rain down on them. The situation's absurdity made Shoto grin. In the duration of just one day he'd been beat up by his father, patched up by his friends and had been searched for by guards like a pickpocket. Laughing he lay in the rain, holding Katsuki's hand, his anchor to the real world. The sky above them poured on them, soaking their clothes and making them shiver. It was no happy laugh. Katsuki sat up, his shirt stuck to his body, soaking wet, and Shoto thought that he had never seen something more great in his life. Stop, Shoto, his friend sat and looked at him with seriousness. The tone of voice he used when saying his name made Shoto swallow. You don't need to act as if you're happy. Shoto shook his head, still laughing. He didn't act. Tears leaked from his eyes, mixed with the rain. The salty liquid ran down his face and seeped away, disappeared in the ground. With his free hand Katsuki punched the ground. I'll take you away from this asshole. The bastard doesn't deserve you in hell. Shoto, Katsuki pulled him up using their linked hands and pressed their bodies together. He felt how Katsuki's heartbeat picked up, angry but also happy. His own heart beat faster too, fluttered in his chest. Katsuki was warm. His laughter had now changed to uncontrolled sobbing. Too many emotions swirled upside of him and he let everything out. He was lucky it was raining already, because he was wetting Katsuki's shirt. All the bottled up feelings of the last years, his mother, his father, the training, Katsuki, everything came out, and while he cried Katsuki held him in place and didn't let go, let him cry, and he sobbed and cried and couldn't stop. I don't want you to feel like this, Katsuki said. I want to see you smile and I will do everything I can to make it happen. Through the more silent sobs that were shaking his body, Shoto smiled. It was very Katsuki to make a statement like this sound like a threat or something he'd do for his personal gain. What he really said was that he wanted to save Shoto. On this day, completely soaked, on the clearing they spent most of their joined time of the last few years of their lives, Shoto and Katsuki shared their first kiss. Their relationship changed a little after this day. They still sparred. Even though Shoto was still hesitant about using his magic, Katsuki still cursed like there was no tomorrow. It even got more. But Shoto learned that it was great fun to tease Katsuki to see his cheeks turn red. Sometimes he spent the night in Katsuki's room, lying in his bed with him, enjoying his company. It was one of the nights when Shoto told his friend, who had become his boyfriend, of his mother for the first time. The genius sorceress who had been married by the king to let his child become what he hadn't, to become the most popular king and acclaimed hero. She had believed that it would become better in the beginning, but when he started to call her children failures, she knew that it wouldn't happen. When Shoto was born, she almost felt relieved that the king finally got what he wished for. Her youngest son inherited both her incredibly strong magic and his father's elemental magic. The way Endeavor treated her and her children didn't change though. The woman bottled everything up, hid it deep inside of her, to be a good mother, but one day it was too much. It had been tea time. Shoto had sat on the soft cushion next to her and had eaten a piece of cake when something snapped in her. His red hair, the blue eye, all of that looked exactly like the king. Shoto only remembered her apologies as she was dragged from the tea room by guards. Katsuki held him while he told the story and didn't interrupt him a single time. His presence was the only thing preventing Shoto from crying. His presence was safety. It was one of these nights when Katsuki told him that he would go away for a while. Shoto was 19 years old and for the first time since 9 years the two of them would be apart for more than a few days. "Where are you going?" Shoto asked and looked up from Katsuki's chest that he wet as a pillow. His boyfriend's red eyes met his dual-colored ones. "I told you that I would kick your dad's ass to free you and keep you for myself, but first I need a place for you to stay. I need a place where you are safe." "A place to keep your treasure?" Shoto asked, his lips quivering. "Damn right, a place to keep my treasure safe," Katsuki said before his cheeks blushed deep red and he realized what he just said. Through his wordless stuttering, Shoto raised his hand and petted his head. "You are very important to me too, Katsuki." He barely managed to contain his grin. Katsuki's embrace grew tighter. Shoto took his hand and squeezed it. He understood. Katsuki wanted to search for a place for them to stay, should something go wrong. "Search for our safe space, Katsuki," he whispered, "just promise that you'll be back." The days without Katsuki seemed to crawl at a snail's pace. Shoto followed his routine, trained, practiced his magic, studied and took part in ceremonies and things of that kind. He would be turning 20 in some months, so certain duties were assigned to him. But without the break Katsuki had been to him, his smile that he wore for ceremonies became strained and his training bored him. It was not even half as exciting as the routine he had with his boyfriend. Over the years sparring had become more of a dance, the both of them dancing to music only they could hear. The dance was never the same, but nonetheless both of them knew what the next step should be. Shoto missed Katsuki. He missed his loud voice. He missed the ridiculous names he called everything and everyone. He missed his grins and his hand, and he missed resting his head on warm scales to calm down after a fight. Without his boyfriend he tried to drown himself in his work, and his father loved it. He thought that his son was finally taking his place as the crown prince seriously. He wasn't. He was just distracting himself from his loneliness. His father didn't need to know that though. A month later Shoto hadn't heard of the dragon. Once he even broke into Katsuki's room when his parents weren't home. Cross-legged he sat on the cold bed and looked at Deku the parrot. "Do you miss him too?" he asked the bird. "Kachan." The parrot answered semi-helpful. Shoto sighed. "I thought so." The leaves that had decorated the trees with their yellow and red hues when Katsuki went away, fell to the ground and let the bare branches invite the winter in. Their clearing was snowed in and Shoto almost couldn't get there. As soon as Katsuki got back, he'd surely go look at the clearing to see if Shoto was waiting for him. But no matter how often he waited, he never saw a trace of his boyfriend. New Year's Eve came and Shoto had to stand next to his father on a balcony and watch together with the people how the fireworks exploded in the sky, blossomed like flowers and withered, died. It was the loneliest New Year of his life. On the morning of his birthday Shoto woke up because of scratching on his window. It was still dark outside, and when he opened his window some snowflakes landed on his face. But he couldn't care less about that, because on his windowsill there were 4 small dragons, each no longer than his lower arm. "Happy birthday, Shoto," Katsuki said as he jumped into his room. He landed on 2 legs and Shoto couldn't help but stare at him. His transformation had become smoother in the last 2 months. Did he also gain more muscle, or did it just look like it, because no shirt was in the way anymore? Shoto's throat felt tight while looking at Katsuki's new clothes. He really liked the furred collar and the earrings a lot. He swallowed hard and forced himself to look away. "Welcome back," he said, and hoped that his voice wasn't quivering. Katsuki grinned at him wildly and Shoto took a step towards him, as the yellow dragon who had climbed into the room by now said, "Kiss your prince already, Bakugo. The tension is unbearable." "What did you say, you yellow piece of shit?" Katsuki screamed and turned around to him. Shoto felt his entire face heat up as he blushed. "Now you ruined it, Kaminari," the black dragon with the white and orange accents said. The both of them didn't see each other for an eternity. "And don't try and tell me that you and Kirishima are any better. Shut the up, both of you," Katsuki said, his cheeks tinged in a deep red as well. "Shoto, I found these annoying scaled S and they'll help me with my genius plan to save you. You're in a good mood today," the knight on the horse next to him said. Shoto straightened his back. He rode his white horse, Yukimaru, which had trained with 2 of the dragons Katsuki brought with him, Shiro and Kaminari, so it could stay still when a dragon appeared or carried it. "Looks like it," he said and went ahead of her. A look back showed the young woman to him. Yaoyorozu was barely older than him and watched him from her horse. She was the leader of the small group he took with him today, and he almost felt sorry for what was going to happen today as he saw her standing there. They were on their way to the royal family's hunting grounds, 4 hours away from the castle. He only took a handful of guards under Yaoyorozu's lead with him. It would be easy. A few minutes later he already heard the signal, Kirishima's roar. He and Yukimaru rushed away. He acted as if the horse had panicked because it was afraid of the roar. While he was getting away from the others, Shiro landed on his shoulder. Together they cast a spell that made a darkness fall upon the part of the woods where the guards were located. A little further into the forest Kaminari was waiting for them. Carefully he picked up Yukimaru. The horse didn't flinch as he held it. It had grown used to dragons carrying it in the past few months. Shiro changed into his human form and climbed Kaminari's enormous back. He would try to calm Yukimaru down if necessary. With some mighty wing strokes the 2 of them disappeared. Shoto stood alone in the forest, surrounded by flowering grass and young leaves. He was waiting for Kirishima and Katsuki to appear. Katsuki sat in Kirishima's back when they finally arrived. Grinning, the blonde held out his hand. "Don't you want to get on, my prince?" With a smile Shoto took the hand. To be continued. I hope you enjoyed this story. Also remember to subscribe and like this video. See you in the next video.